There needs to be, particularly in areas of high risk, there needs to be a complete change in the infrastructure, like just updating it, fixing it, making it more modern, using the latest technology to protect it so it doesn't fault.
Electric utilities have more than just unprecedented load growth to worry about. In many territories, wildfires loom as an increasing threat, becoming larger and more frequent, necessitating proactive solutions. In this episode of the Factor This podcast, we tap into the brain of a leading expert to discuss the evolving threat wildfires pose to utility infrastructure and explore how a rigorously tested product could stand as an effective means of protecting vital equipment. Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Factor This podcast. My name is Paul Gerke, Content Director of Factor This. Today we're having a really important discussion about one of the most pressing issues in the utility space right now, what to do about the increasing number of wildfires that are becoming seemingly more destructive with each passing season. To talk about this pressing problem and a really interesting solution is Dr. Craig Clements, Professor of Meteorology and Director of Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center at San Jose State University, and Steve Willoughby, the Senior Director of Building Materials for Hexion. We're going to talk today about the evolving threat of wildfires, why this isn't the same problem that utilities were facing even just a few years ago, the impacts on utilities right now in this space, and proactive solutions they're exploring, including one called ArmorBuilt. Dr. Clements, I'd like to start with you and talk a little about the evolution and societal impacts of wildfires right now. Can you share from your perspective some of the significant changes we've witnessed in wildfire behavior just over the last couple of decades, especially in terms of frequency, intensity, and spread patterns?
Yeah, so we've been seeing an increase in large, devastating, catastrophic wildfires, particularly in the western U.S. and California, and just the last few years and over the last decade. And this has been linked to changes in fuel moisture content, drier summers, drier winters, and drought linked to climate change. And so as the evolution of the climate keeps changing in the next couple decades, we should expect even more intense fires. In addition to these climate variables, we have more communities in areas they were never before. So we're having expansive neighborhoods in what we call the wildland urban interface. And so that's a big challenge because you have more homes in areas that are prone to burn that weren't there previously. So it's kind of an issue with changing weather and climate and more at-risk communities in the wildlands.
You touched on this, Dr. Clements, but there are some direct and some indirect societal impacts here of these increased frequency and intensity of these fires. How are they really impacting our lives and the role of utilities, quite frankly, moving forward as we sort of adapt and try to stay ahead of the moving nature of this?
Well, so one thing we're seeing in areas that are at risk, communities are impacted by the insurance rates, which are going up. Many companies are dropping clients and in full communities. And so that's becoming an issue when people have already purchased homes in these areas and then they can't get insurance or the insurance rates are going up. And additionally, if there's a fire in the area, you have lots of smoke. And so that really impacts the health, not just of the communities that are actually impacted by the fire itself, but communities that are downwind, like even major urban areas, like let's say the LA Basin or the San Francisco Bay Area or Portland. These areas can get smoke inundation that can really impact health of the communities that you wouldn't expect because you're so far away from the fire itself. So those are some big things that are really changing policy across the Western U.S. because it's impacting everybody, not just people living in the wildland urban interface.
Yeah, this is really top of mind for a lot of us right now, Dr. Clements. I feel like especially on the heels of the tragedy in Paradise, California, a brutal wildfire season this year. Can you detail, specifically how infrastructure vulnerabilities, utility poles, things like that, exacerbated the devastation once that fire really kicked up and the winds, started moving it along?
Yeah, well, not just the campfire like in Paradise, but a lot of fires in these areas that are extreme. They're usually associated with downslope windstorms, so very, very strong winds, very, very dry conditions. The fires burn very rapidly. They're associated with ember cast or firebrands, which are small particles that are transported downwind from the main fire front. They land on homes, they start new fires, and so the fires can spread really rapidly. Even though the fire front is maybe a mile or two away, the fires are starting in the communities, and it takes people by surprise. One issue that we see in a lot of these types of fires is smoke. So with a lot of smoke on the roads, it's very hard to navigate. It's very hard to escape and do evacuations. And so another issue, so that impacts people trying to get out, and emergency response. So first responders have impacts with that smoke, trying to direct people during evacuation. But another issue is that we have fallen trees and same as fallen utility poles, which are have live wires on them. So you have a lot of dangers in this case where people are trying to evacuate ahead of fires, but because of the spotting nature of a lot of these fires, they're burning other areas ahead of the fire front. You can get down power lines, and so it becomes a very dangerous situation and can entrap people at times.
You talked about the people worrying about insurance covering, some of their losses in the event of wildfires. Utilities have to use insurance too. And a lot of people watching this or listening to this probably have heard about the way some utilities in California pooled together a wildfire resiliency fund to try to sort of handle some of these things. And we're talking, tens of billions of dollars in this fund, but still not even close to what we'll need to sort of remedy, just this past wildfire season. Utility companies, I feel like, are more and more in this spotlight where their responsibility, their liability. Did they shut off power fast enough? Did they take care of their equipment the right ways, especially in those wildfire prone areas, Craig? What can utilities do to sort of shore up those responsibilities before it's too late and they're on the hook for an untold sum of money?
Yeah, what we've seen in the last decade and a half in California with the major utilities here, Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, is really the model for the other utilities around the country and around the globe that are facing wildfire risk. What they've been doing, which is using cutting edge technology for numerical modeling, fire prediction, fire risk calculations in their territories to understand the risk per circuit. So they know exactly like what the wind forecast should be, what the wind is going to be on that circuit, on those lines. And so they can actually de-energize or do a public safety power shutoff, which is now becoming commonplace in California. It's now moving out of California across the Western US, and other utilities in the East Coast are looking into implementing PSPS procedures due to the fact that if you can turn off the power in time, you can limit the risk of your infrastructure, of utilities infrastructure, causing a catastrophic wildfire. So they're using state-of-the-art weather models and fire prediction model systems, state-of-the-art observing systems, weather stations, and wind profiling systems, and looking at all the conditions, the environmental conditions that can lead to catastrophic wildfire. And with understanding those risks, they can de-energize in a safe manner in a proper timeline to protect property and lives. So there's a lot of things that they're doing. They're also doing things with their infrastructure, not just building up capacity in numerical modeling and fire behavior research and modeling, but also looking at dealing with their infrastructure directly, updating old utility lines and the poles and the infrastructure for transmission lines and distribution lines. And so with that is some of this, protecting the utility poles, making them more fire resistant.
Yeah, that infrastructure piece I feel like is critical, Dr. Clements. It's time. You said timeline is a word that you used. I really like that because time is of the essence here. Speed really matters when it comes to shoring up infrastructure, doesn't it? And from your perspective, have you seen that the faster we can just do something in some of these places is better than doing nothing?
Oh yeah, I think there's going to be there needs to be, particularly in areas of high risk, there needs to be a complete change in the infrastructure, like just updating it, fixing it, making it more modern, using the latest technology to protect it so it doesn't fault during these types of conditions, whether it's just faulting during high wind load or during actual wildfire and being at risk of ignition of the infrastructure itself.
At the top of the program, we talked about a solution called ArmorBuilt. And if you're paying close attention, you may have noticed that last question is sort of steering us back in there. I want to get back into that ArmorBuilt solution, Dr. Clements. So you led some groundbreaking research, a controlled burn that simulated a worst case scenario in Salinas, California. Salinas.
Salinas,
I'm
yeah.
I'm going to take it from the song lyrics I'm familiar with because that's the only thing I know about Salinas, California. Could you share a little about the insights that you gained from that controlled burn with ArmorBuilt?
Yeah, so what that project was called the California Canyon Fire Experiment. It was the first large-scale canyon experiment ever conducted on the planet. And the reason why that's such a big deal is it's very hard to do high-intensity prescribed fires. And prescribed fire is a fire that is put on the landscape for ecological purposes. But we were able to take advantage of that with our colleagues at CAL FIRE who were needing to burn an area of very complex terrain east of Salinas, California. And what I asked is like, hey, is there a canyon that we can simulate a wildfire in and do it safely? And it just, everything lined up, and there was this a number of canyons that were going to be burned. And because they were able to burn out the backside of the land, so a couple of miles behind the canyon was going to be pre-burned, that allowed us to do what's called a head fire. And a head fire is a fire that burns with the wind, and in this case it burns high intensity up the canyon. And so to do that in a controlled manner is very, very difficult, and we were lucky to work with CAL FIRE to conduct those operations. But the experiment was twofold. One of it was to look at the fire behavior, because we've never been able to observe extreme fire behavior in a canyon like this before, because we had all our tools, our towers and such, and instruments. We had helicopters and drones measuring the fire intensity and the fire spread, and we had radar and LiDAR and all these different observation platforms. But what it allowed is one of our Hexion was part of the center. They were actually part of the project, and they were allowed to place their poles that were wrapped with the ArmorBuilt product in the canyon or on the edge of the canyon and in other parts of the burn to simulate what an actual high intensity wildfire in shrub fuels would look like. And so for the first time, they were able to test their products in as close of a wildfire as possible in these types of conditions, because canyon fires are highly intense. They have very long flame lengths, high intensity, 1,000-degree temperature, 1,000-degree C temperature, flame temperatures that burn very rapidly and very intensely. So they were able to test that. And so it was a partnership between San Jose State University, CAL FIRE, some other universities that I work with, and Hexion.
A very cool opportunity for someone to just light stuff on fire. I mean, just sort of like, 1,000-foot view to sort of step back and be like, wow, this is an opportunity that not most folks get, just to explore how crazy things get really at the tip of the spear like that. So how did ArmorBuilt perform in this test? What conclusions did you draw about, actually applying it to real world solutions?
I was quite impressed because we put our sensors on those ArmorBuilt wrapped poles, and I should also mention that PG&E provided the crews to emplace those poles and our equipment in the field or in the canyon. And so we had to wrap our instrumentation cable. We wanted to wrap it underneath the ArmorBuilt, but because it was already pre-wrapped, we had to do our own kind of thing, and our stuff failed. Whereas the Hexion sensors within the ArmorBuilt, they actually survived the fire. Some of our stuff actually worked and didn't fail, but we had a couple of cables that did melt. And that just good. I've been doing this for 20 years, doing fire experiments. So, it's just part of the game. But I was really impressed that the material was able to protect those poles during the fire front passage as it just burned high intensity past those poles. It was really cool. And at the point where I was like, man, we should probably use ArmorBuilt for our own cabling, for our own research projects in the future. So I could see its application for other entities, like either building materials, not only just utility poles, but other infrastructure that need to be protected.
Well, that's a solid 15-second testimonial we can just clip right there for the folks at Hexion. Not too bad. That's a great segue, too, to bring Steve Willoughby back in from Hexion. So, Steve, I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. Talk to me about the development of ArmorBuilt. What is it? What went into making it? What are the challenges that you faced in coming up with this fire resiliency solution?
Yeah, so basically our team saw a real problem, right? I mean, you've heard Dr. Clements talking about that there's a need to protect communities and frankly save lives. And that's something that's a deep-rooted commitment inside of Hexion. So our team, several of the folks on our team got together and said, what can we do to solve this problem? And ultimately came up with the solution that today, using innovation, came up with a solution that today is called ArmorBuilt that protects poles.
So how does it protect poles? It sounds like from Dr. Clements, you're wrapping it in something?
Yeah, so imagine almost like an airbag for a utility pole in a lot of ways, okay? So you would wrap the pole in a mesh. It's a black mesh that when a fire hits it, within about 20 seconds, it activates and prevents burning. It prevents strength loss. It prevents pole failure. It basically puffs up and protects the pole. And that's a very strong barrier. It can withstand flames up to 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're talking about a pretty strong barrier. And we've seen, as Dr. Clements mentioned during field testing, great results.
Steve, I'm sure you did a lot of research in coming up with this product and exactly, where it would have applications. In your research, reviewing other previous wildfire disasters, what sort of situations did you find where ArmorBuilt, might have served as a solution to prevent some damage to utility equipment?
Yeah, so when you look at some past utility wildfires, you can see, for example, situations where enhancing utility pole durability is critical, right? Especially think about areas where people are living near the wildfire areas, right? Where you need to maintain your evacuation routes, where you need to reduce the chance that somebody in a community is not going to be able to escape. We could see those types of situations creating hazards, creating liability. And in some cases where these types of things have happened and cases where we could see them happening, we strongly believe that if utilities had used ArmorBuilt, some of those poles wouldn't fall.
Dr. Clements, you've seen your fair share of wreckage on the back end of wildfires. Done a lot of research out at San Jose State University. Yeah, just take a step back. What drives your passion for this? Where are your headwinds, and why are you so interested in this particular part of the sector?
Well, I think as an academic, we're always doing our research kind of in the ivory tower, isolated from real world cases.
The ivory towers at San Jose State, they talk about them all the time. They never shut up about them. Yeah.
So, it's important for our research to have applications to the real world, and wildfire research, wildfire science totally does, and particularly for limiting the impacts on society. From my point of view, I'm trying to better understand fire weather and how it leads to critical fire conditions, trying to better understand extreme fire behavior, and particularly in canyons. That's one of my main topics. And to actually have companies also invested in that question, like how can we, better protect society from these extreme fires and be invested in our projects is a win-win. And so that partnership of having Hexion and PG&E involved in that experiment gave us more value because typically, these are federally funded and privately funded research projects that generally just end up with a bunch of publications and peer-reviewed literature that scientists read. But for the first time now, we have companies that are like, hey, we did this test with these universities, and these are the results. And it provides legitimacy to these products, which is unique in academia. We don't usually do that. So
yeah, it's out of the tower and into the real world.
Yeah. And that's where we have to be in wildfire science. And you can see now the space for wildfire science is increasing. I mean, it's just crazy. There's so many tech companies, so many startups, not only here in Silicon Valley, but all around the world that are, trying to come up with new solutions to help society deal with this new wildfire environment that we're all seeing unfold.
It sounds like elected officials are starting to throw their weight behind some things too, in terms of the big R, the resiliency factor. Like how can we make the stuff that we've got a little stronger to withstand these wildfire threats? Dr. Clements, what have you heard about in terms of potential regulatory changes out there in California, and what that might do to the ecosphere of wildfire resiliency and prevention?
Well, there's a lot of home hardening going on, and that's particularly in communities at risk where cities and agencies are requiring new home builds to have particular construction materials and different techniques to prevent their houses from igniting so easily, from venting material, roofing materials, and also landscaping. Creating a buffer zone, defensible space around the homes is required. And actually, insurance companies are implementing that requirement as well. So if your house is at risk, it's at risk in a at-risk area, you're going to be required to modify your landscape in order to get the best insurance rates. And so with new products coming online and new technologies, it's only going to help homeowners deal with the risk of wildfire in their communities. So it's things should be changing. And so there's some legislation out there to increase prescribed fire in communities, to reduce the fuel loads around the communities themselves, in addition to changing the home hardening requirements for these communities.
It sounds like people can sort of get ahead of it by helping themselves a little bit and understanding what the threats are and what they could do to shore up the risk. Steve, I want to bring you back in for just a second. How is your company Hexion preparing to support utilities as those new regulations sort of percolate and we try to figure out what they look like?
Yeah, so as you really start to think about it, first of all, we're working to build an extremely reliable, sustainable supply chain and to build further on our strong track record of highly effective wildfire protection. And then even beyond utilities, we're looking at continued innovation in the fire safety space and trying to figure out where else we might be able to take these sorts of technologies to protect people, to protect property, and to protect communities.
I'd like to wrap this up with some closing thoughts. Dr. Clements, I'd like to start with you. I think that it's worth harping on a couple different points that we discussed over the last 20 minutes or so. The urgency, the need to get solutions as fast as possible. Two, the need for those solutions to have real world applicability and not just something that we imagined on a piece of paper somewhere. And three, and I think that this is an important point too, that it's the impetus is now shifting from just like, what could happen to us to what can I do? What can, Joe Utility do? Or what can Paul homeowner do to prevent the worst from happening? Dr. Clements, with all of your research and everything that you've done with your Cool Canyon experiment, could you provide some closing thoughts on where we're at in the world of wildfire resilience? I've screwed that up like 3 times, by the way, and sort of what the next step is. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing now is an urgency for communities to become more resilient, and that is increasing fuel reduction programs in the forests, in the wildlands around communities. So that would be either, mechanical fuel reduction or prescribed fire fuel reduction to reduce the fuel. So if a large wildfire does start and it does start burning towards a community, the flame heights, the fire intensity will be reduced because there's less fuels around that community. So that's one thing that is becoming really critical, and a need to be moving forward across the Western US in these communities is doing fuel reduction programs. And that's mostly through prescribed fire, which is the best ecological way to do that. And so that's one way. Another thing is each homeowner should be thinking about changing their landscape around their home. Like no fuels, no shrubs, no flower beds, 0 to 5 feet out from the house. That's like kind of a priority now, is making sure that you don't have combustible materials around your home. Because it's not just the flame front. Again, I've mentioned this earlier, but it's not just the flame front that is, impacting your house. It's embers that are falling from the sky, out of the smoke from the fire front that could be a mile away from your home. Those are landing on your property. If there is combustible materials near your home, they're going to ignite, and it's just as if the flame front was on your house. You now have your shrubs around your home igniting and then catching your structure on fire. So there's a lot of things that homeowners can do to protect their homes. So I think those are the two big things that the prescribed fire programs in the Western US that are ongoing, and individual homeowner home preparedness and dispensable space.
And Mr. Willoughby, any closing thoughts on how Hexion and ArmorBuilt can sort of serve as a solution, not only for utilities, but for anyone looking to sort of protect, their property from the imminent and increasing wildfire danger?
Yeah, we really see ourselves as a partner to folks like Dr. Clements, to folks like the utilities, in solving this real problem, right? And we're bringing ArmorBuilt to the market, and at the risk of tooting our own horn a little bit, it's an essential, proven measure that can help safeguard communities, save lives, and really mitigate risk for utilities.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for today. I want to thank Dr. Fred Clements from San Jose State University and Steve Willoughby of Hexion for their invaluable insights and contributions. I know we'll be talking about this topic again soon. Gentlemen, have a great rest of your day. That's it for the Fact of This podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.